right, hello, good morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning. Yeah, let's go. As we get ready to make this big turn out of summer, and yes, students back to school, but I just want to take a second and say if you're watching this online at some point, it's so cool. I think that you're watching it. Hopefully you get something out of it. And also a big shout out to our Liberty Hill family out there. Go Panthers. Football season is right around the corner, and soon all will be right in the world today. My name is John Evans. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and my wife Allie and I and our 4 kids, we're just so grateful to get to be a part of Rockpointe, and we love you guys. Just want to mention next week we kick off a new series called Friendology, where we're going to look at the power of friendships, because great friendships are rare. And so you're not going to want to miss that. Hey, maybe tell a friend, bring a friend. It's going to be a great series. I'm sure it's shaping up to be a good one. But today, I'm here to help wrap up our 5-week series, The Games We Play. Now, week 1, Shane kicked off the series with our central theme, and it's this. It's when it comes to relationships, yes. When it comes to relationships, a game that requires a loser is a game that nobody wins. And so he talked about the game of life and used the game of life. Maybe you remember that game where you got the little car and you add the little pegs that represent your children and your family, and you have that spinner. And it's a fun classic game. But he really brought forward this question that's just stayed with us through this series. And the question is when it comes to family relationships, what is the win? Now take a second, think about your family, and there should be a win. And so what is that? And what we've defined that is, it's real simple. It's the relationship. It's your family. And so then week 2, Adam shared with us the change game and how we end up hurting those closest to us, trying to fix them. And he used the classic board game Operation, the little guy laying on the operating table, and you had those little tweezers trying to get the bones out, and inevitably you would touch the side, and what would happen? The nose would light up, it would buzz. It was a fun game. And then week 3, Darren out in Liberty Hill and Shane here in Leander, they talked about the blame game, which is really saying it's not my fault, and how the blame game creates a losing team. And they use the classic whodunit game, the game of Clue. That's a fun game. It's always Colonel Mustard with the candlestick in the kitchen or the library. Last week, Shane used the illustration of poker and talked about how assuming leads to a losing hand and how believing the best changes the game. And so today we're going to wrap things up talking about criticism, about being critical in your family and in the relationships. And so maybe you've played this game. We played this game growing up. We played the game Taboo. You know, you maybe have played this game. It's a little card game. You divide into 2 teams. You have a guesser and you have a clue giver. And the clue giver goes through these cards where there's a key word. And below that is a list of taboo words. And you get this little timer and you turn it over and you race the clock to see how many words that you can get right. And along the way, if you use one of the taboo words, well, you get buzzed, which my dad or I would inevitably get this, which I probably should have used one of these this morning. I don't know if you ever did that. But we played the game Taboo, and it would just, the hard part about that game and the game that made it so challenging and it is so difficult is not using the list of those taboo clue words. I mean, you'd either just kind of freeze up because you were so fixated on not using those words that your mind would just like try to think of other ways, and eventually what would happen? You'd eventually use one of those taboo words and you would get buzzed. And that was what would drive you crazy, is not finding the words on their list. Because why? It's because we're all critics, right? And being a critic, what happens is we have circles of friends, people in our neighborhood we sit around the coffee table with. And now we carry this different level of influence and platforms through audiences and through followers. And so instead of trying to be careful and navigating our words and choosing those carefully, what do? We grab our phone, we open it up, and we just become keyboard warriors. And we just say everything that's on that taboo list. We just put it out there. We say whatever's on our mind. And we get hypercritical in a way where we stand on a hill that we're ready to fight or die on, and we just type away. So for example, just take a second and think about one of the favorite places that you've ever visited. Or maybe a national park or a national monument or a vacation where you went somewhere, and think about the view. Just that view that comes to mind and how beautiful it was and how breathtaking it was, or maybe the sense of pride you felt as a Texan or an American standing at that monument, and how that made you feel, where a picture could not even come close to the actual experience. A place where you could just put a check mark next to something on your bucket list. Now, I remember my wife and I, we took a trip one time. We went to Hawaii and we visited Kauai, an awesome island. And we did this thing where I don't know if it was a mistake or not, but we sat through a timeshare, which we had to say no like a million times. I'm surprised we made it out the door. But we did it to earn a helicopter ride. And so we hopped on a helicopter and we flew through this place called the Waimea Canyon, which is the Grand Canyon of the Pacific. And I'll never forget just the endless waterfalls and the rainforest. And we came back out and came around this turn called the Nepali coast, where there was this steep rainforest embankment down to the turquoise waters where it met those white sands. And it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, so much so that the other couple with us, it couldn't even distract us that the wife decided to utilize the complimentary white bag there, where she proceeded to lose her lunch in the helicopter, a little glass bubble that we were trapped in. It didn't even distract us from that. It was so amazing and so beautiful, but something just boggles my mind. And it kind of cracks me up because of how ridiculous it is that you can leave a Google review of these such places. A place like the Nepali coast. The Nepali coast currently has 4.7 stars on, on Google. I think it deserves 6 out of 5. This one guy said, "We did the beach landing tour in front of the Nepali. It wasn't interesting at all, and there was absolutely nothing to see in the snorkeling area but reefs and fishes. Besides all these frustrations, the area is beautiful, 2 stars. Thanks, Jimbo Gumbo _2450. Another person wrote, "Meh, I mean, it's all right, 3 stars. I mean, dang, it makes me wonder what other marvels and wonders these guys must have traveled to see, to leave these reviews. And it intrigues me in the world of Yelp and TripAdvisor that statistics show that we are more likely to leave negative reviews than we are positive reviews on places that we've been. I mean, maybe you've heard this, that these statistics show that our brains have a stronger emotional reaction to negative experiences than positive experiences. That when our expectations aren't met, when the littlest of things go wrong, that we determine that, man, this experience is so bad that it's going to outweigh all the positives. Now, these thoughts and these feelings, they live longer, and we're more likely to talk about it, write about it, and be a critic on Google and Yelp, and especially on those neighborhood Facebook pages, if you know what I'm talking about. Now, you may not be the kind of person that's going to drag a mom and pop shop through the dirt because your soda was flat or the waiter didn't hug you enough. But if we're honest and we look inward, we can see that there's something within us where we see the bad and we focus on the negative, where we can become overly critical. And pointing it out and letting someone know and writing about it. And we have a critical eye where we look for the negative, and we're naturally wired where the negatives outweigh the positives, where things don't measure up to our standards. And we see what should change, or what needs to change, or what needs to be done to meet our standards, and so we voice that. And I have to acknowledge that not all criticism is bad. I mean, in organizations, it helps them improve and organize, deliver a better product, raise customer satisfaction. And even within our marriages or relationships or with our kids, it helps us communicate better. It helps us live under one roof successfully. But today what I want to do is focus on and challenge us to think about is how you and I have a critical tendency in our hearts that can create critical spirits that can put relationships and our family at risk, hurting those closest to us and the ones that we love the most. That we are critical of them because they don't measure up. Or we are critical of them because they don't meet our standards. Or we're critical because they don't believe like we believe, or your faith doesn't look like my faith, and that you are doing it wrong and I know what's right. And this word game that we played that we're going to call for today, we're going to call it the Critic game. And for all of us, we live on both sides of this game where others are critical and judgmental of us, and where we are critical and judgmental towards others. Like maybe even by now, or if you spend 5 minutes with me, you probably already have your thoughts, feelings, and opinions. Like, why does that guy always wear a hat to cover up his receding hairline and wannabe mullet? Well, here, did that make things a little better for you? Or I've heard somebody just tell me I have the attention span of a mosquito. Like, start up a conversation with me and I'm sure I'll get lost in my own ADHD thoughts that I'll miss it. Or if you stick around and you eat some food with me, I will probably chew too loudly or take too big of bites, and this is going to be a terrible experience for you. But we've all heard that I wish you would quit doing that, or that you need to stop doing this, or you need to work on that, or you need to get past this or that, and that you need to change this or that. And so now I'm not focused on constructive criticism, and I think we can all think of ways we can get healthier and things that we are working on or procrastinating that we need to work on, and we definitely need people in our lives to help us change and to be better. But the tension around the critic game is how it can become toxic. Not by the change needed in me or you, but how it can foster a critical spirit that misses God's heart towards the person in front of us and hurts the relationship or hurts our family. Because it's so easy for us to recognize and to see and to be triggered on those things that we don't like, where we are the critic, and that the things that you need to stop doing or could have done or do differently. And what will happen is when we play the critic game is we end up standing on and climbing this hill to this high ground, where we feel superior to be able to look down at those around us. And from that vantage point, the value of the other person made by God becomes secondary to the issue that we think needs to change. And so we get fixated in the change game on the thing or the things that the other person needs to change. And so we end up looking down on them and we make sure to let them know. Or maybe you've been on the other side of this, where you've experienced being on somebody standing on their high ground and makes a judgment call on you, on your character, on your faith, how you do your job, maybe how you should parent, or what your marriage needs to look like, where you feel criticized and judged. But when we look to Jesus, he never came down to look down on anyone. He came to win people. And the change isn't the issue. The spirit in which we bring to the other person is the issue. And Jesus spoke directly to this in his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7. He dealt with this particularly with a group of religious elites, religious people who were playing the critic game. And he looks at them in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, and he says this: do not judge. Jesus isn't saying we should never talk about what's right or what's wrong. He isn't saying we shouldn't say the truth in love. What he is saying with this word judge is the attitude of superiority when we criticize and jump on people's failures and faults and condemn others without a loving concern for them. He's addressing this attitude we carry when we're on the hunt, when we're ready to go, ready to leave a 1-star review. And he's addressing this, and look at what he says. Or no, this is what he is saying. This is what he's saying. He's saying to judge is to be critical before you are compassionate. And this is where we care more about the issue than the person on the other side of it. And it's a way of leveraging being right rather than valuing the relationship. And that's the issue with the critic game, is when you do this, you're leveraging yourself to be right or to win, and it comes at the expense of the other person where there's a loser. And what are we learning through this series is that when we play this type of game, nobody wins. Then Jesus goes on to say in Matthew 7:1, he says, do not judge. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured to you. How you judge others, you will be judged by others. So the question is how do you want to be judged? When it comes time for you to sit and to listen and look at somebody in the eye when you're being criticized, when you're being called out in ways you can be better, or what you should do, what you should eat, what you should wear, how you should look, where the person cares more about the issue than they care about you? Or do you want to be looked down, or not looked down on, but looked at with some empathy and compassion, keeping the relationship in mind? And I know that's an easy question, and I know what I would choose. And a few verses later, Jesus summarizes some things. He summarizes it by saying this in verse 12. He says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. This is the golden rule coming into play. Judge others the way you want to be judged. Love others first, the way that you want to be loved, or bring your issues to someone the way that you would want them to be brought to you. Do not judge others, or you too will be judged. He could have just dropped the mic and could have just walked away and left it at that, but he uses imagery to drive his point home. And back in verse 3, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? That word plank. It's not a twig or a stick or your average 2x4. This word plank is a load-bearing beam. So why do you focus on the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye when you have a load-bearing beam sticking out of your own eye? Not even noticing the plank in your eye. This isn't about sin, that your sin is worse than my sin or the degree of sin. This is about our tendency to fail to see our own flaws and shortcomings as we criticize and judge other people. And that's a bigger deal to God than the speck that we see in someone else's eye. And do you know why we do this? It's because we feel like the speck is in our eye and that the plank is in the other person's eye. He goes on to say this in verse 4. He says, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? And the truth is that you can't. When you're so hung up on and stuck on the things that you notice and the faults of others, holding a standard that we can't even hold for ourselves, that we're doing two things. Two things are coming into play that make things so toxic. And simultaneously, it's our ignorance and our arrogance. It's our ignorance of our own shortcomings, and it's our arrogance thinking that we have full knowledge of someone else's. Does this mean we're not supposed to help people change or hold anyone accountable or speak to someone in truth or love? No, because look at what Jesus says, because there's an order here that matters. In verse 5, he says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eyes or your eye. He isn't saying we're not supposed to take care of someone else's speck. He's saying before you do, make sure you're aware of your own shortcomings. And so I want to use two things to help me make this point before we close things out today, is that first, we're really good at criticizing and judging others and entering into that with the magnifying glass. And that this is what we use to criticize and judge others. Our children, their behavior, when they're coming in the door past curfew, our spouse, not meeting our needs the way that we want them met or our expectations, our boss, his or her decisions and why they might make them, or our coworkers not getting the job done well enough, or our neighbors, or even strangers. We walk around with this, seeing those issues and magnifying them. And what Jesus is challenging us to do is to evaluate ourselves before we enter in those conversations. We should walk around with the mirror, to look into the mirror first and to recognize before entering those conversations, there's things that need to be dealt with first. To judge and to evaluate ourselves, and the order of this matters. First, hold the mirror before the magnifier, because the time that you spend with these matter, especially in our families. It'll change our perspective and help hold our family relationship and relationships in a healthier way. It'll change our motivation and prioritize the person before the issue. And the mirror will shift our hearts and open our hearts for Jesus to heal us and give us wisdom and to see things his way, not just our own. And what it'll do is it'll help us shift from being critical to being compassionate. It'll change the way we approach someone if there's something that needs to change. But we just love holding this up. We just love holding this up when you're looking at the bank account, waiting for your spouse to get home. We just love holding this up. When somebody says something, when your kid talks back, or you're waiting to address something with your child, or your parents. And we love holding this up. And do you know what it looks like and why we do this? And I put together three things that it looks like when we hold up the magnifier. Is that first, when we hold the magnifier, it looks like an elevated view of self. That we think our beliefs, our perspectives, that we know better than everyone else, than the way they think. The way something should be done or needs to be done, that my way is the best way, I'm right and you're wrong. And then I'm gonna call you out and I'm gonna let you know about it. And the second thing that this looks like is it looks like unhealed wounds. To deflect the pain or trauma that we've experienced and to avoid ever feeling that hurt ever again, that we're gonna look at yours. We're gonna look at everyone else's before we look at our own. That we fill it with other things. We distract ourselves, and then it plays out looking like anger. It can lead to depression and addiction, and we stay in that place of denial when we walk around holding the magnifier. And it constantly keeps us focused on someone else's speck of dust when we've got the plank sticking out of our own eye. And the third way that this looks is a misunderstanding of God's heart. And again, he didn't come to get anybody or keep score and determine that you're too far gone, where he's turned his back on you, he's abandoned you, and he's left you. Because what the scriptures tell us is that he gave his life as a ransom for me and for you, and that he's never gonna leave you, no matter how too far gone you are. And he gives us a better way through following him. And the longer we hold up the magnifying glass, the more legalistic we become in calling out others, and the less compassionate we are to see for a second maybe what they're going through or what it is they truly need. And when we hold the mirror, the only way to stop playing the critic game and start playing a better game, the compassion game, and the longer we hold the mirror, the more we begin to take on and see the things of God, where our empathy grows, where we see the relationship and we see the other before the issue, and it shifts our position of high ground to low ground, to be able to look up to those, to see the needs of others that he's placed in our lives and purposed us to reach and to offer him, and to sit next to them in their mud and in their pain, to lend a listening ear and to offer them encouragement and hope. And the longer we hold up the mirror, the more our heart breaks for our children, for our spouse, for our parents, for our coworkers, our boss, our neighbors, strangers. And the longer we hold this up, we take on compassion before criticism. And so what does it look like to hold up the mirror? First, it looks like a heart to love and serve others by starting with looking to God to say, how can I grow? And to look at those planks and say, what planks am I ignoring and missing here that I need to address and take to you. It invites community with Christ at the center of it to open up to accountability to help us move forward and grow in the ways in which we need to. It allows us to take a look in the mirror, which is where we need to look, to see, number two, to see your brokenness and the need for healing, and recognize our need to surrender, to begin or continue the work that he has for us in our life, where we seek and offer forgiveness and reconciliation. And the third way, when we hold this mirror, that it looks like we see people the way God sees people. Again, it opens our heart for others, and we begin to treat and love others first the way that we want to be loved and treated. We seek to understand before seeking to be understood. We enter conversations with curiosity, looking for ways to help somebody, for ways to serve people, instead of just looking for an entry point to get our point across and to be heard. It helps us see our God-given gifts and talents and uniqueness in the way that he created us, to be a resource, to be a giver of him, and to be on mission. And so this point here, when we hold the mirror, is it the more aware I am of what God is doing in my life, the less critical I am about what I think needs to change in yours. Spend more time with the mirror and stop playing the critic game and begin to play the game of compassion. With our kids, we only get them for a blink of an eye. And for many of us in this room, maybe that time has already passed. Maybe your kids have kids, and you see the urgency in this and the power in this, and it's not too late. How significant and important it is for us to be walking around with this in our relationships with our spouse or our significant other, to be able to help meet their needs first, not coming with expectancy. With your brother or your sister, instead of walking around with this, spend more time with this, to be more focused on what you think needs to change in someone else's life or in your brother's life and what you think you need to be done, constantly holding this up. Remember what the win is here. The win is relationship. The win is family. In the game that requires a loser is a game where nobody wins. That when we hold up the mirror, it allows for God to do, which is only his Spirit can do, which is a change of heart in our own lives. And for us to focus on our side of the street, in our families, in our relationships, instead of constantly focused on their side of the street, to trust and allow for him to do what only he can do in their life, which is change their heart. And so first, enter in your family and in your relationships with the mirror, because the win is your family and the win is relationship. Let me pray for us this morning. God, thank you so much for sending your son that came to us not with a magnifying glass or a microscope. God, where your grace and your love and your compassion for us led you to the cross for me and for everyone. Lord, help us see how important this is for us to hold this mirror, to look to you, to look at ourselves and allow you to examine our hearts and to be honest with the areas of brokenness and the things in our life that we need to take to you to allow for your Spirit to help us work through, even just the way that we are. Thank you for your mercy and for your grace and compassion, that you're not waiting for us to get cleaned up first or get our act together, that your heart loves us. And so help us receive that and then turn and offer that to those closest to us. Lord, help us take the things that we've learned today and the things that we've learned through this series and help us apply it to where it matters most in our families and in our closest relationships, and help us be on mission offering that to our community and those around us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.